The world of courtrooms, lawsuits, and legal issues can be confusing. That's why K-Texas has assembled a team of experts to help you make the right moves with the K-Texas Free Legal Show. Today's show features Ashton Anderson, a local attorney representing homeowners, landowners, consumers, and debtors through financial or personal hardships.
Good afternoon and welcome to the K-Texas Free Legal Show. I'm Denise Bailey. When it comes to family indebtedness, there's probably nothing more emotional or stressful and sometimes confusing. Today on our show, we have Abilene attorney Ashton Anderson to help us make sense of it all. Welcome to the show, Ashton.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, sure. I was born and raised out in Colorado City on a cotton farm out there, and I went to Texas Tech for my undergrad and then up to a tiny little college in Kansas for law school called Washburn University. I'm married. I have 2 kids. My wife's a school teacher here in Abilene, and my 2 sons are 3 and 4 months old. I practiced in Dallas for several years before we moved back out here, and we just decided we want to get closer to family, back to the big country, and back to a smaller community where we could feel more involved.
Well, welcome back to the big country. Welcome home.
Thank you.
In today's economic times, some families begin to feel a little tight in terms of their finances, and with that, you know, creditors are calling, they're falling back on payments, you know, with their home or their vehicles, and it gets very confusing. What options do families have?
Well, I'm really glad we're doing a show like this. I think it's important that people know their options when they're struggling financially. If they don't know their options, people typically tend to stick their head in the sand and don't do anything, and that just tends to make things worse. So hopefully what we can do is talk through some of those options so people can have a place to start to figure out how to solve their problems.
Well, and one of those options is a term we hear a lot thrown around, and that's bankruptcy. Could you tell us a little bit more about what bankruptcy is?
Sure. It's a big question. There are several types of bankruptcy. There are bankruptcy specific to cities and municipalities. You probably saw that Detroit attempted to file bankruptcy a few weeks ago. There are bankruptcies specific to farmers and fishermen, but there are 2 types of bankruptcy that most people qualify, most individuals qualify for. There's one of them is called a Chapter 7. It's sometimes referred to as a liquidation bankruptcy. The other is a Chapter 13. That's a reorganization bankruptcy. A Chapter 7 is what I think people typically think of when they think of bankruptcy. It's a 3 or 4 month process at the end of which your unsecured debts are discharged, meaning your hospital bills, your credit cards, your payday loans, they're discharged. You have no legal liability on them anymore. Chapter 13 is more of a restructuring of your debt. It allows you to pay back a percentage of your debt over a period of 3 to 5 years. So if you run a budget, and if you're able to pay a certain amount each month, that would then go to a bankruptcy trustee who would dispense it to your creditors. A Chapter 13 is filed in a lot of cases to stop a foreclosure or to stop a repossession. It allows you to bring those current over that period of time. So if you're behind on your payments or set for foreclosure, it would not only stop the foreclosure, but it would allow you then to get caught up over that period of time. So you would make your payments each month to your mortgage company like you normally would, and then you'd make an additional payment to the bankruptcy trustee, and when you came out of the bankruptcy, you'd be current.
Well, you mentioned something about unsecured, and I know we as consumers have some fears of what people would get to keep in the event of a bankruptcy. In fact, we asked some of our big country residents that very question.
When I file for bankruptcy, what do I get to keep? Do I get to keep my house, my car, my guns?
All right, Ashton, so let's answer the question. What does someone get to keep in the event of a bankruptcy?
Well, that is always one of the first questions I get when I meet with people. That's the biggest concern is, are they going to take my house? Are they going to take my car? And as a general matter, it's always dependent on a person's circumstances, but usually you get to keep your house, you get to keep your car, you get to keep your household goods, jewelry, All of these are subject to some limits, but 9 times out of 10, you get to keep all of those things.
Okay.
The bankruptcy code provides for certain exemptions, which is stuff you get to keep. Both the state of Texas and the federal government have their own sets of exemptions, and essentially you get to pick and choose which one's better for you. Texas, for instance, has a virtually unlimited homestead exemption, so if you had a $100,000 house and you had it paid for, you could still keep it under Texas exemptions. It's not true for federal exemptions, but those are some of the differences. You get to keep 1 car per licensed driver in your household. So if it's you, a spouse, and a 16-year-old, then you get to have 3 cars.
And I suspect that's when your expertise comes in, is when we're trying to determine the Texas versus federal exemptions, what is going to work best for an individual family than just overall.
Absolutely. If you go in and file under the wrong sets of exemptions, you might actually end up losing some of the property that you otherwise shouldn't have.
Well, and another term you hear from time to time are protected assets. Is that what falls under those exemptions as well?
I would classify that as what an exemption is, as a protected. For instance, under Texas exemptions, you do get to keep 2 firearms. The federal code doesn't have a specific firearm exemption. So filing one or the other there could be huge ramifications for.
What about my retirement?
Retirement accounts are exempted as long as they're qualified retirement accounts. 401ks, IRAs, government retirements, all of those are exempted. The types of things that, as a general matter, aren't exempted: cash and bank accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, CDs, non-retirement account, boats and airplanes. Those types of things you typically have to worry about. Real estate that's not your homestead, so if you have a rental property that has equity in it, more than 1 car per licensed driver in your household, those are generally the things that you might need to be worried about being non-exempt. But just because you have those doesn't necessarily mean you won't get to keep them.
Right.
For instance, the federal code provides for a wild card exemption, and in certain circumstances you might be able to exempt something that otherwise would be non-exempt.
So again, looking to you as the expert or the advisor, a college savings that's just in a traditional savings account that has been set aside for college, that's when we really need to get you involved to make sure it's done correctly.
Sure. If it's just sitting in a savings account, there might be some issues there.
Okay.
If it's in an education 529 type account, yeah, those are the types of how they're actually qualified and classified is very important.
Okay. All right. More with the Free Legal Show in just a moment.
When your finances become insurmountable, Anderson Law is there to help.
The people that come see me are good people that life has hit with unexpected financial problems. They don't know what to do, they don't know where to turn.
Your problems are unique to you. Anderson Law offers custom solutions.
What constitutes a serious financial situation is completely dependent on a person's individual circumstances. What might be insurmountable for one person might not be for someone else.
When you need protection and help, Anderson Law.
Dealing with debt collectors can be a frustrating and scary experience, but there are laws to protect you from abusive and harassing debt collectors.
No matter your situation, you have choices. The right choice is Anderson Law. Visit our website at AshtonAndersonLaw.com or talk to Ashton at 325-261-3005.
When you call Anderson Law, you're going to speak to me. Then we'll sit down and discuss your financial situation and find a solution that works for you.
All right, Ashton, help us to know, what should we do if we get behind on house payments? What step needs to be had?
Well, the first thing that needs to be decided is whether or not you want to keep the house or not. But if keeping the house is the goal, there are a few options to stop a foreclosure if you're set for foreclosure, or to postpone a foreclosure if you think that may be where things are heading. The first thing that you can do is to try and negotiate with your mortgage company. There's
Do you do that after you've missed or are behind with 2 months of payments or 6 months? I mean, what's a good time frame there?
Wherever you are in the process.
Okay.
If you're 2 months behind, the earlier you start, the better, because the closer you get to a foreclosure date, the more limited your options may be. But there are several things you might be able to accomplish if you're persistent enough. The federal government has enacted a modification program. It's been in the news a lot, the HAMP program. If your lender is willing to participate in that and negotiate with you on that, they more than likely, they may postpone a foreclosure while they are reviewing that process. The important thing to remember about that is, though, that will not by itself stop a foreclosure. If your lender moves forward with the foreclosure, just filling out a HAMP application will not stop it. So you need to make sure that if you're in those negotiations and you're also posted for foreclosure, you need to make sure that they put something in writing to tell you that the foreclosure has been postponed.
So that HAMP application, is that something as an individual can get online to do, or is that something that they need to come to you for?
It is something that can be done on your own. The government has a website, makinghomeaffordable.gov, to walk you through the different types of modifications that are in place. It can be a tricky process. The banks, there's lawsuits going on all over the country based on what people perceive to be bad actions by the banks in bad faith negotiations in dealing with these modifications. The important things to remember are to get them every document they ask for as quickly as you can. You want to keep the ball in their court, and then when the ball is in their court, you want to pester them. Otherwise, it'll sit and sit and sit, and your documents will go stale, and they'll ask you to then resubmit the paperwork. And I've had clients that have been trying to get modifications for upwards of 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And so it can be a messy affair. There are other options. If you're able, if you can come up with the money in some way, you can reinstate the loan, which would just be simply bringing the account current. If you have other options, it may not be advisable to look to retirement accounts and those sorts of things. But if it's your only option to save your house, and that's what you want to do, it might be something worth looking at. Forbearance agreements are other options that could postpone a foreclosure.
And talk a little bit about a forbearance agreement. Is that?
A forbearance agreement is an agreement you enter into with your bank to either stop payments for a period of time or make reduced payments for a period of time. Generally, they last from 6 months to a year. They're best in situations where something has happened that's going to keep you from making a payment for a period of time.
Illness or
loss
of a job or something like that.
Loss of a job is a little bit difficult because if you don't know when you're going to get a job,
Right.
But yes, something like illness or loss of job are the types of things that a forbearance agreement could help you with.
And again, that's something that a family or a couple or an individual would need to come to you for guidance on those steps on how to get that handled.
I could certainly help negotiate a forbearance agreement. The one tricky issue with a forbearance agreement is most of the time the lender is going to want those payments that you skipped made up relatively quickly after you come out of the forbearance agreement. So it might be a stopgap for a little while, but you need to make sure you've got something in place on the back end.
With that forbearance agreement, does that affect someone's credit like a bankruptcy would, or is that?
Well, a forbearance agreement is probably not going to be reported on your credit. Well, it may, but they're not going to post the continual every month that you're not making payments, because you've entered in an agreement with them to not make those payments.
Right.
So it could postpone the negative credit reporting.
Okay. All right. Thanks for answering those questions on the forbearance. What are some of the other options in terms of if you're falling behind on the house payment?
Well, as we discussed a little while ago, a Chapter 13 bankruptcy is an option if you're set for foreclosure. A Chapter 13 bankruptcy would stop the foreclosure. It also then, as we discussed, provides you with a mechanism to then get caught up. So it would stop the foreclosure and then moving forward allow you to cure those arrearages. The other potential options that are available, if you can point to something that your lender has done improperly or incorrectly, you could ask a judge to grant an injunction, basically forcing them not to foreclose.
Mm-hmm.
There are any number of reasons why a restraining order or an injunction might be proper. Your mortgage company has certain notices that they have to give. If they don't give any of those properly, that might be a ground to stop a foreclosure. For instance, before they can even post you for foreclosure, they're required in Texas to send, if it's your homestead, they're required to send a letter alerting you to the fact that you're in default and giving you 20 days to bring the account current.
Mm-hmm.
If after that 20 days you still haven't brought the account current, they can post you for foreclosure, but they're required to give you 21 days notice before the foreclosure can occur. So not following any of those properly or correctly might be grounds to postpone
there are
foreclosure.
mortgage companies that goof up and not play by the rules?
Sure, absolutely. Other things that a mortgage company you might want to look out for, if they've made what you perceive to be a misrepresentation or not told you the truth in some way leading up to the foreclosure.
Give an example of that.
Certainly. I've had clients that were working on a HAMP modification with the lender and were told to their face and even in an email that the foreclosure would be postponed due to their working on the modification.
Mm-hmm.
The client took them at their word, and the day after the foreclosure somebody came and knocked on their door and said, "I bought your house." So, and in that situation we had to file a lawsuit to try and unwind the sale because it had already happened. But if any type of misstatement or misrepresentation has been made, getting the restraining order before the foreclosure occurred would save a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so after that, what are some of the other options?
Well, if you decide that the house is just too much, it's either too expensive or you've lost a job and just don't have the income to support it, but you'd really like to avoid a foreclosure and avoid
Mm-hmm.
it showing up on your credit report, your options are a little more limited, but if you've got enough time, they'd certainly be worth looking into. The first option is just trying to sell your house.
Mm-hmm.
If you're within a few weeks of the foreclosure happening, that might be kind of tough, but it's certainly something to pursue.
Right.
There are situations where you've got a willing buyer ready to buy your house, but they're not willing to pay anywhere near what you owe. You might be able to get your lender to agree to what's called a short sale, and that's basically an agreement where the lender agrees to let you sell the house for less than what you owe on it.
In the event of a short sale and they agree to that, then that balance of what it sold for that's less than what's owed to the mortgage company, how is that made up?
That can be a tricky question. That's a little bit of a tricky question. The lender could come after you for a deficiency. So, for instance,
For that $30,000 balance.
right? Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
If it was 100 and you sold it for 70 or something like that.
correct.
And that's what we read and heard a lot about in California during the 2007-2008, didn't we?
Absolutely. Now, there are some defenses. If your house is only worth the 70, you might be able to argue that that they can't come after you for the deficiency because the fair market value wasn't any more than what you sold it for.
Okay. You know, debt collectors. We hear, there's jokes about them. There's all sorts of things. Tell me, what are my rights when dealing with a debt collector? Do I have to answer the call? Do I have to return the call? What needs to happen?
Yeah, anybody who's ever had a call from a debt collector knows how frustrating an experience that could be. There are many consumer protection statutes in place to protect you from that type of, from abusive debt collectors.
That's exactly what it sounds like sometimes, is they're a little bit abusive.
Absolutely. Texas and the federal government have debt collection statutes in place that provide rules for what a debt collector can and can't do. A debt collector can't contact you anytime they want to, or if you've informed them that you're not allowed to be contacted at work, then they can't contact you at work. They can't falsely accuse you of a crime or threaten to charge you with a crime if you've not committed a crime.
Right.
You know, failure to pay a debt is not a crime. There's no such thing as a debtor's prison.
Though it may feel that way sometimes.
Right. Debt collectors can't threaten to seize or repossess your property if they've not gone through the proper channels first in order to do that. And most debt collectors on just your typical credit cards and that sort of thing, they're going to most of the time be required to get a judgment against you, file a lawsuit, get a judgment before they could ever start to garnish bank accounts or anything.
So
like
if
that.
someone ignores the calls because they're late on a credit card payment and they don't answer the calls, is that going to affect, or will that have a negative reaction in terms of that debt collector, or does it matter?
If you don't want to talk to a debt collector, I wouldn't advise you to.
Is that your professional opinion?
That's my professional opinion.
Okay.
And certainly I wouldn't continue to talk to them if they are using profane or abusive language, if they're calling you repeatedly or causing the phone to ring over and over. Those are the types of things that are those are the types of things that these statutes are intended to protect against.
So you said abusive debt collection. That's when they're abusing their authority, so to speak, or the role that they're playing, because they really don't have authority in terms of, like you said, a crime.
Right.
But abusive. Does that happen a lot? Is that prevalent amongst your customers?
All the time.
Oh, wow.
All the time. And one of the things that people, rightfully so, get the most upset about is when debt collectors start calling family and friends and employers, and that's where the potential for abuse really lies. I've had clients that have had their employers called and told that they were going to be charged with a felony.
Oh, wow.
I've had siblings called and told that their sibling was going to be arrested and that they needed to call to give a recorded statement about their involvement. You know.
Wow, Ashton, you're a wealth of information. Sounds like we've got enough for another show. It's time for us to take a short break.
When your finances become insurmountable, Anderson Law is there to help.
The people that come see me are good people that life has hit with unexpected financial problems. They don't know what to do, they don't know where to turn.
Your problems are unique to you. Anderson Law offers custom solutions.
What constitutes a serious financial situation is completely dependent on a person's individual circumstances. What might be insurmountable for one person might not be for someone else.
When you need protection and help, Anderson Law.
Dealing with debt collectors can be a frustrating and scary experience, but there are laws to protect you from abusive and harassing debt collectors.
No matter your situation, you have choices. The right choice is Anderson Law. Visit our website at AshtonAndersonLaw.com or talk to Ashton at 325-261-3005.
When you call Anderson Law, you're going to speak to me. Then we'll sit down and discuss your financial situation and find a solution that works for you.
Thanks for joining us. Ashton, you've covered a lot of information today, and I bet there's an additional amount that we could go on, like I said, for another show. If our viewers have any questions, what do you suggest that they do? Call you directly, or?
Well, sure, absolutely. Hopefully this was a good starting point for people to find some answers, but if people have additional questions, I would encourage you to visit my website. I've written some articles relating to these types of issues that will hopefully provide people with more information. But every situation is unique. So if you have questions about your particular situation, please feel free to call me.
Well, and it sounds like that every situation is very unique and very personal, and that's why it is important to seek your legal counsel, because there's not a template that works for everybody, correct?
That's right. And Yes, absolutely. I'll be happy to speak on the phone. I'll be happy to set up a face-to-face appointment. I do a free initial consultation, so there's no harm in coming in and getting your questions answered.
Okay. The program you have just watched is also available online. Go to freelegalshow.com. Also, if you have any more questions about anything we've talked about today or would like more information about Ashton and his legal practice, visit his website at ashtonandersonlaw.com. ashtonandersonlaw.com, or you can call his office at 325-261-3005. Until next time, I'm Denise Bailey, and thank you for joining us.
When your finances become insurmountable, Anderson Law is there to help.
Most people know that bankruptcy could be an option to resolve your financial difficulties, but it may not be the only option.
Anderson Law provides services to help with your financial crisis. Your problems are unique to you. Anderson Law offers custom solutions. No matter your situation, you have choices. The right choice is Anderson Law.
When you call Anderson Law, you're going to speak to me. Then we'll sit down and discuss your financial situation and find a solution that works for you.